By the end of the second day of 2025, I had already spent $2,239 from my emergency fund. I'll admit I'm a little nervous to talk about this decision on my channel, as I know maybe people disagree with me, but I do want to discuss it and see what you guys think. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Avery and I make videos all about my personal finance journey. I talk about both the good decisions I make, the bad decisions I make, and perhaps the questionable ones that I make along the way to my journey for financial independence. So if that's something that interests you, definitely hit the subscribe button and stick around. Let's talk briefly about what happened. So in 2010, we did get a new childhood pet named Ginger. She is a Cocker Spaniel, and I'll put some photos on the screen so you can see what she looks like. Obviously, 2010 was quite a while ago, so now Ginger is 14 years old as of December 29th. So as you can imagine, she is on the older end and she's starting to develop some health issues. Over the past few weeks, she had this cough that was progressively getting worse. So my sister ended up calling me on the 2nd. We were talking about it, and I ultimately told her that she should bring her up to the emergency vet hospital to have her checked out, because the veterinary office that she normally takes her to is a rural vet, which is not necessarily a bad thing. They just have more limited resources, and based off of when my sister got off work, she would not have been able to take her there before they closed for the day. And ultimately, I thought even if we did send her there, she was going to end up having to come to the emergency vet hospital anyways. So we just thought it'd be better to cut that out. Long story short, they did end up seeing her, and I felt like they saw her pretty quickly. They ended up doing an x-ray, echocardiogram. They talked to a dog cardiologist. It's crazy what kind of resources or like advanced care options that they have for animals nowadays. And they ended up hospitalizing her overnight in order to figure out what was going on and continue performing care. My sister and I were thinking that she likely might have had or was going into heart failure, but they were discussing maybe that she would have pneumonia, and obviously those are two very different things. So they needed that time overnight to look into what was going on and try and make a treatment plan. Fortunately, she is not in heart failure, but they did think that she had pneumonia. For her heart, she does have the early stages of what's called mitral valve disease, but since she was in the early stage, okay, stage 1, they decided that she did not need medication for it this time, but she should follow up with a cardiologist within 4 to 6 months. So they ended up thinking that they would keep her for a couple of days, but they actually sent her home early the next day with a round of antibiotics. So assuming that she does well, that should clear up within the next week or so. As mentioned, the total cost of this visit was $2,239, and I ended up putting the entirety of this purchase on my credit card, and my plan is to pay it full from my savings, at least for now, and my sister and I have a plan for her to pay me back for half of the cost within the course of the next year. I really want to talk about why I did it. I did it for a few reasons. First, it was unclear what the issue was. Even though she's older, I know it's hard to balance the quality versus quantity of life care, but I knew it was important to get her checked out in order to figure out what the problem was and see if it was something that we could more or less cure, or if it would be more so managing it and how that would be for her prognosis. But since she's a high energy dog and she's still in good spirits, I'm pretty certain that she's going to do okay with the round of antibiotics and be better off within the next week or two. Obviously, nothing's guaranteed, but ultimately we did not think that she was at the end of her life yet, so it made sense in order to spend the money to figure it out and treat the problem. Now I want to talk about whether or not this was an emergency. I think this is kind of debatable on a few different fronts. For some people, they know, or instinctively you know, that you are going to eventually have emergency or sudden vet expenses for your animal. So in that sense, if you are in a good financial position, you could create a sinking fund and save for it over time. Or if you like to pull money like to have just a general emergency fund, you can have saved an emergency fund and pull money that way. So yes, I think it can be considered an emergency. Now, whether or not it's my emergency, since I'm not technically financially responsible for Ginger, is kind of where this comes in. So even though she's not technically my dog anymore, I still made the decision to cover the cost for her major expense. I think it's difficult because in an ideal world, she would be in a strong enough financial position to not need assistance. But in a practical world, I think there's a lot of circumstances and situations that we find ourselves in over time. There's just a lot of context and family history that I do not have time to give you and kind of can't give you in a way that more or less makes this decision more difficult than you might think. So, with that in mind, I really do caution people from passing judgment, and this is not just for me, this is online in general. When I'm watching some videos, I feel like there's very negative comments on things. So, because you've never lived someone's life or ever been in their situation and you don't know everything that they're dealing with or going through, I really think it's important to caution against passing judgment on people that you don't necessarily know everything about. If you don't really know someone that well, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt that they are doing the best they can with the situation that they're currently in. That's kind of just my own rant for a different day. I don't care if you critique my decision, it's fine if you want to. In fact, I'd love to hear about it. But just in general, I think it's just important when I'm telling you about stuff with like my family or my siblings that you shouldn't pass judgment on them, because I'm not doing that. Like, I came from a poor family. I'm talking Medicaid, food stamps, free or reduced lunch, issues with health insurance or being underinsured, job losses, bankruptcies, the list goes on. There have been all of that and more just in my family and in my childhood. And obviously that impacted how I handle my finances and my money. Generally, because of all those situations, I have tried to become a saver, and I'm more risk averse than the average person might be. For example, I may be able to make more money on the private market with a job, but I feel more secure in the public market when I'm working a public service job. So it's not necessarily just financially risk averse, it can also just be like career risk averse, life risk averse. So the people across my family tree at any given point, there have been farmers, there have been blue collar workers, there have been people that have struggled with addiction, mental illness, so on and so forth. It's really not until me and my sister that there has been some attempt to try and break the cycle. And I'm not saying this like this is a negative situation to be in or a negative sort of life to live. It's just that in order to get to a better place financially, we have to make certain decisions that would be different than what the people before us have done, while still understanding that it's not going to be perfect ever and that we have to keep that in mind. So obviously, I want to get to a point where my family is at least somewhat self-sufficient or able to make good financial decisions with their money, but we're just not there yet, because although we are progressing, progress is not linear. It's just a work in progress, and I believe in helping along the way. So with that in mind, let's talk about the idea on whether or not you should lend money to family and what I think about it. Obviously, it's a difficult line to balance because there's, of course, I think in every family, people that want to take advantage of you, unfortunately, which can kind of ruin it for others that are in your family when they need assistance. So based off of your life circumstances, you might rightfully look down upon the idea of lending money to your family members or your friends. But I think a lot of times in the personal finance community, especially online, we lose a bit of nuance about lending money or paying for someone's expenses that is lost in favor of black and white thinking, which is kind of what I've been thinking about lately. What I've been thinking about is how we spend our money is both logical and emotional. While you try to aim for balance, you ultimately are just doing the best you can, and how that balance shakes out might be different or weighed heavily one way or another depending on what's actually happening. I feel like a great example of that is whether or not should you pay off low interest debt early or invest more of your money. For many people, it might make more sense from a financial standpoint, so logically, to invest the money and just pay the minimum on the debt. But emotionally, there might be a big connection to paying off that debt as quickly as possible and then focusing on investing after the fact. There's many decisions with money that can be very nuanced and can just be very highly context dependent. Basically, it can be emotional too, as opposed to just being a logical choice. But back to actually lending money, I was watching Nick True's video on whether or not lending money to family is toxic. I'll leave a link down below if you want to watch it because I think it's a great video. He mentions trying to think about how giving money is or is not in alignment with your short and long-term vision for your life. So an example of giving money that might be in alignment with your life is, let's say you attend a church and you tithe. That tithing is you giving money that is in alignment with your short and long-term vision, which might be attending a church and being devoted to your religion. But if something is negatively impacting your life when you give money, you should really look into making adjustments. Basically, is you giving money actually helping someone, or is it enabling them? And if it's putting you in a worse financial position than where you hope to be, you should really highly reconsider how you go about helping someone. So I had watched that video before this situation had even come up, but once I actually went through this situation, I ended up rewatching it. And it made me really think about, like, what is my short and long-term vision for my life? I'm still young, like I'm 26, but I've discovered over the years, I've kind of refined my why, or why am I even building wealth in the first place? I've realized that my why, for why do I want to be wealthy, is I want to be in a situation where I can help my family. I want to be in a situation where I can help those I love get through major life experiences, like going to college, buying a house, maybe we're helping them with that. Like, I want to actually be in that situation. Now, of course, just giving someone money doesn't necessarily help that. Like, I still also want to be able to more or less teach them what I've learned about personal finance and inspire them, if I can, to take control of their financial choices and what their outcome is in life. But in general, I want to be a generous person. That's what I want. Like, I don't want to be this financial tightwad or money miser with my money. Obviously, I'm still in the early stages of trying to build wealth. So it's very important for me that I don't just constantly get lost along the way or make decisions that negatively impact my long-term goals. But I still know that I want to make or get to a point where I can be as generous as possible and within reason in my life. What I really liked about his video is he mentions reframing the idea of helping someone financially with the ability to bless someone in the short term that ultimately helps them long term. So that's really what I was thinking about after I made that decision. Like, I was also expanding on the thought a little bit, and it kind of made me like almost emotional, I guess, because I was just thinking about, like, I'm truly very grateful for how far I've come so far when it comes to trying to build wealth and make a better financial life for myself. So I was really thinking about, like, what a blessing it is to be in a situation where I can ease the financial burden for someone that I love. It's a blessing for me to be able to get care for our childhood pet with, for the most part, I'm not too worried about the total cost of it, within reason, of course. There's, of course, limits to what I can do, but it's truly a blessing to be able to just be like, yep, I'm covering it. Because although we do have a lot of control over our finances, where we start and where we come from can really impact how far we go and how quickly we go. I also consider it a blessing for me to be in a relatively stable employment situation in a job that I actually enjoy, and I'm in a relatively stable living situation, and I've made it to the position where I can try and help people. Like, I'm obviously not made of money, so there is limits to how much money I can give to people, and of course, if there's situations where some people are taking advantage of that, it's also not something I really want to fall into or be in a situation. And it's not just for family. I just want to be financially generous to as many people as I can throughout my life, if I can help it, which is ultimately why I want to build wealth to the point where I can actually share it with people without this concern that I'm going to run out of it tomorrow or just have this scarcity mindset. That is what I'm striving towards on my financial journey. So what I think is also not really considered is that when you come from a poor family, the dynamics of money and just making spending decisions is very different than what someone has if they might be from a more financially well off or have more resources. It can be a little more complex because there is just more to it when you have less money to work with. Maybe sometimes things don't necessarily make sense to you, and I have this problem too. Maybe certain decisions don't necessarily make sense to me because I have just not been in their situation or experiencing what they're experiencing. So with all that in mind, I actually do feel pretty calm about this decision. I know that my sister will pay me back over time, but ultimately I'm not too worried about it, in the sense that I always make sort of decisions like this with the idea of, am I okay if this money never came back to me? This is also kind of how I feel about vacations. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just controversial in this regard, but for example, there was a couple years ago, I was unable to go on a trip, and I ended up losing like the flights. Like, I could not get refunded for it, and I was not able to transfer it away that would make sense for me. So I ended up losing like a couple $100 on this flight. But in my head, the money is already gone. Like, once the money's gone, if it comes back to me, great. But if it doesn't, I'm perfectly fine with that. I've already made the decision to spend it. So I'm not going to go back on that decision after the fact, especially since you can't always do that. I also want to mention that we do have a plan in place to help my sister get to a point where she's financially better off or in a stronger financial position in the future where she can better handle these sort of situations when they come up. So I really just see life as a process of calibrating and recalibrating the decisions that you make. I want to live life without regrets, and I think I do a pretty good job with this because oftentimes when I make decisions in life that I don't necessarily like looking back upon, I don't beat myself up about it. I just have that guide me in how I'm going to make decisions in the future. I really don't mind if I make a mistake on something. I just try to let that take into consideration how I act going forward. And I think it's a very good way to live because you don't need to beat yourself up about something if you didn't like how you went about doing it. You literally cannot change it. So, yes, I am fine with this major expense. Unfortunately, I did have another major expense that wasn't necessarily unexpected, but I did not like the way that it happened or came about. So I'm not at peace with that decision, especially from the perspective of, am I helping people or am I enabling them? I feel like that one is even more difficult to talk about, but since this is my channel and I try to be financially transparent, I will talk about it in a future video. So if you want to see that, definitely subscribe and stick around and it'll come up soon. But of course, all of these major expenses does change how I'm thinking about and will be doing my new budget for the year, which is why that video has gotten delayed a little bit because I need to spend some time just going through it and thinking over any changes I want to make. And sometimes that's not even necessarily making a financial change. It's just making a mindset shift in a way that I'm at peace with. So yeah, a video about how I'm handling my budgeting for 2025 is coming. I just need to make some updates first. Now I really want to hear from you all and let me know what you think. Based on the information I've given you, do you think I made a good decision? Would you have done something slightly different? Do you think there's something different I should do going forward? And have you ever had an experience where you helped someone financially and you were actually fine with that and you were happy to do it? Or did you have a situation where you helped someone and you regretted it? I'd love to actually hear about this because I think it's such an interesting topic. But yes, thank you for watching. If anything in this video resonated with you, I'd love it if you would hit the like button to support my channel. I hope your year is off to a great start and I will see you all in the next one. Bye now.